people went shopping, they started meeting, they started gathering, and so on. But we're also hearing more and more people and more experts saying that we also have to assume that Omicron is there, my community transmission. Now, at what point do we say that it is more driven by Omicron than driven by mobility?
Right now, I think we are looking at the perspective that the Omicron, or the assumption that Omicron is already in a local setting, and we're trying to validate this by the genotyping or the sequencing that we've been doing. But apparently, I think the mobility, which actually increased in the last few days or few weeks because of the holidays, really made the COVID-19 infection higher, because the Delta is also here with us. I mean, there are also a lot of unvaccinated individuals or people around that they have been going around, and definitely that will impact also the transmission of the whether it's Delta or Omicron.
Doc, aside from the RT-PCR test, is there any hard and fast measure by which we can differentiate between Omicron and the common cold? Because I know that there are many who are also who've got the cold, no, and they've had themselves tested and they turned out to be negative. Yeah. And pediatricians are also saying that this is also part of the seasonal viral transmissions around this time of the year. So, but as an ordinary, layman, is there a way to differentiate, to distinguish whether, to tell whether yours is just a common cold or flu, or if it's already COVID?
Yeah. In fact, the symptoms are almost very similar between the flu and this COVID-19. Both are of viruses. One is the influenza virus, and the other is the COVID coronavirus. But definitely for the symptoms, what is very definite about COVID-19 is that you have a loss of taste and smell. And you don't see this often in flu-like symptoms. And in the matter of tests, I think testing for the antigen, especially for COVID, would be a definitive way of telling if you have symptoms, whether you have COVID or this just the ordinary flu.
Doc, USEC sabi nila, the Omicron daw is milder, even if it's more transmissible than Delta. Pero what we can see now in the hospitals, ang bilis-bilis na pupuno, no? From PGH to even private hospitals. What are your preparations? Kasi on the part of the government,
you're right.
Unvaccinated,
right.
Yung mobility. But what about hospital preparations?
Yeah, right. Mami, and well, it's not really good news to say that Omicron brings out mild or asymptomatic cases in the active cases that we do have. But apparently, with the sheer volume later on, if you have reached probably about 15,000 active cases here in Metro Manila, then it's going to be really a problem in terms of hospitalization. Yeah. Because the number of hospital beds that we have only for COVID allocated is about 10,000 plus, and we have about 1,450 of these ICUs. Now, definitely, we have now seeing a pattern where there is an increased admission for the hospitals right now. And in fact, the hospitals now are trying to transition from the servicing the non-COVID, because a lot of these non-COVID patients who needed say elective surgeries or special services in a hospital, they have to be discharged because somehow the allocated beds will have to be reserved for this COVID-19, and basically some of these patients now are reluctant to go in, or they wanted to be discharged earlier because they know that this Omicron is highly transmissible. So what we've been doing is that since the last 2 years, we've been trying to ramp up our health capacity because, as you all know, when we started off with COVID-19 in 2020 of September, I can remember we only had about 750 intensive care units here in Metro Manila. And it was really very hard to ramp it because of the infrastructure concern. So what we did was really build more of this ICU beds, especially in the government-retained hospitals, and building up of these modular or the field hospitals that we have in Metro Manila. So here in Metro Manila, I think we have already ramped close to 450 to 500 beds, which are specifically designed for severe and critical cases, so we can handle them. So that actually ramped up our intensive care units to about 1,450 at this time. We doubled up since last year.
Pero
What about in terms of...
You said kukunti pa rin. I mean, at the rate it's going, considering what happened since just a week ago, at what point will the hospitals be overwhelmed?
When we have actually, when we say that you have a 70% occupancy, we always term that as high risk, meaning to say that in across the country, we have almost 41,000 or close to 41,000 beds allocated for COVID. Now here in Metro Manila, we have at least 10,000, close to 10,000 beds for COVID patients, and that would mean beds for isolation and beds for intensive care units. So definitely, when we say that you are reaching an average of say 15,000 a day, definitely that will actually overwhelm or even overwhelm our system here because of the sheer volume that we will be admitting in these hospitals. So the only way that we can do that is to decongest these hospitals by coordinating their referrals to other regions, like we did before. So we had to make sure that the referrals of severe or critical patients that would need ICU and we don't have any vacancy around, then we actually coordinate this with the One Hospital Command in Region 3 and Region 4A. So that's what we've been doing, and we're now trying to make sure that the regional One Hospital Command can easily coordinate across, from different regions, so it would be easier for us to make the necessary transfers and referrals.
Well, sir, possibly a big chunk of that decongesting could come in the form of people who are just suffering from mild or asymptomatic COVID, from not going to the hospitals to try to get treated and lining up and blocking the entry of those who are really in need. Now, with that in mind, let me ask you this po. Kasi in the last few days, I don't know, maybe the last week, parang there's been a run for analgesics, biogesic, and driving them to buy these analgesics, or is there another way of handling this, a better way of handling this? For example, I see a lot of antigen kits being sold on the internet. Would that be an alternative versus going to laboratories which are more expensive?
And you should understand with the present news all over, I think the community has there's anxious of what's going to happen.
Yes, sir. Yes,
so
sir.
In that kind of behavior, they tend to make sure that they have the necessary kits and medicines around with them to make sure that to safeguard the family. So I think it's just the anxiety that's driving this, and we hope that with the interventions of government and the individual behavior of persons that can contribute to to lessen the risk, I guess we can slow down the transmission. We hope so. That's our goal. We hope for the best and we just prepare for the worst.
Talking about interventions,
just a quick, idagdag ko lang doon, only because it's related there, because kanina binalita rin namin sa big story yan. To the point that people are saying not only that there's a rush, that they perceive a shortage. DOH was trying to qualify it and saying it's not necessarily a shortage. What's actually happening on the supply side of paracetamol, for example?
Well, paracetamol is it's being produced here in locally, and we also have suppliers coming from abroad. But I don't think that there is going to be a short supply of these analgesics because it's being locally produced here in the Philippines.
Talking about interventions nga, Yusek, meron bang tulong na magagawa yung the fact that there's now molnupiravir, which is a treatment? Are we prepared in case, those are needed, aside from the usual remdesivir that we administer to those who are already, in severe levels? Does the government have enough of this already on hand, just in case the situation turns worse?
Okay, Lucia, the 2022 is really far better off than 2021 or 2020 because of the antivirals that came around, and these were actually going to be distributed in the early part of 2022, although molnupiravir started to be distributed in the last quarter of last year. And these antivirals are actually a breakthrough because these are oral medications. You can take it if you have mild asymptomatic or moderate moderate case. You can be at home, and these antivirals can actually reduce the number of severe cases that we have, and also the hospitalizations. Now, for the first antiviral drug, molnupiravir, the first preliminary studies on this show that it was very effective in preventing hospitalization and even severe cases in about 50 to 80%. But on a larger study, they found out that the data was not validated, and they said that only 30% of molnupiravir of these patients can be prevented to be hospitalized. So the other good news is the antiviral, oral antiviral that's being also produced by Pfizer, and that's a Paxlovid, has a better efficacy in terms of as an antiviral. It has a very good data. It prevents roughly about 80% of the persons who have mild and asymptomatic disease to be hospitalized or to have severe. So we're having stocks of molnupiravir right now because that has been distributed last year, and you can actually take this. It's an antiviral pill. It will work in about 30 to 40% that you will be free from being hospitalized or getting into severe case. But however, the other antiviral drug, which is the Paxlovid, is now undergoing review for an EUA by the FDA. So once the EUA will be given, it will be easier for Pfizer to distribute this to the different distributors here in the country.
Can that come in time for Omicron spread?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, great. Yeah,
I think so. It's the papers are now with the FDA soon. They will release the EUA, and definitely Pfizer can come up with the supplies needed for the Philippines.
You said
and how much would those medicines be? I just wonder, are they within the reach of
ordinary? Within the reach, ma'am. Within the reach. Not as expensive as tocilizumab, which is actually given to severe and critical cases. And this is really an anti-inflammatory agent. No? So this is more expensive. So it is even less expensive than remdesivir, which is an IV infusion. So I guess it's within reach, and we have stockpiled already. Some hospitals already stockpiled molnupiravir, and we're hoping that once Paxlovid comes into the market, we will be able to procure some.
Yusek, follow-up ko lang yung paracetamol. I think people are stocking up on it. Saka yung mga gamot sa sipon. Kasi tama ba yung explanation na kung may symptoms ka, halimbawa colds, fever, if they don't go away with yung ganyang klaseng ordinary medication, it's more likely that you might have COVID. Tama ba yun?
No, I don't think so, ma'am. These are any kind of flu-like symptoms, even COVID, even after you take the medications, they won't be gone. Whether it's an influenza virus or a coronavirus, it's almost the same.
Na ibig ko nga sabihin, if they don't go away with that ordinary medication, mukhang may COVID ka. Tama ba yun?
Hindi. I don't. That's a myth. That's a fallacy. I don't. It's not true.
But related to that, Doc, and ito, asking for a friend, frankly, I'm asking for myself also. And I imagine a lot of people might be in a similar situation. I was supposed to have my booster shot today. A lot of people have lined up for booster shots in the coming weeks and days. Now, if the symptoms for Omicron, mild, knock on wood, are similar to flu or colds and so on, ano yung guidance for them? Diba? Parang, I'm anxiously waiting, I'm excited for my booster. At the same time, what are the chances na ito palang symptoms na nararamdaman ko is Omicron or so on? Can they take their booster with symptoms? Do they need to clear themselves with an antigen or RT-PCR test before they go to take their booster shots? Ano pong guidance sa ganun?
Yeah, the guidance is if you're a close contact and you're vaccinated, you should at least isolate 7 days. You must be symptom-free before you move out of your isolation and take the booster shot. What is not good is if you did not complete the isolation and then somehow you have symptoms and you go.
Oh, Doc, I think we lost your audio.
Na-mute yata.
Doc, na-mute ka. Doc, na-mute ka.
I'm
Ayan, there you go. There you go.
Yeah, so
You're good now.
so I think that the best way is to finish off your isolation 7 days before you take the booster shot, because you might be a public hazard in terms of as a close contact to other people if you move out.
But Doc, two things there, di ba? Parang yung isolation and then yung symptoms, di ba?
Right.
And I guess my ultimate question is, let's say natapos ko yung isolation ko, meron lang akong nararamdaman na kaunti, do I ultimately need a negative test before I actually?
No, you don't need to. But as long as you've completed the isolation, you don't have symptoms, you go for your booster shot.
Doc, balikan ko lang, Doc, yung tanong ko kanina with regard to the antigen test. Kasi in the end, kasi yung antigen tests are more accessible to most people because it's a lot cheaper than the PCR tests. How does it work? If you don't have any symptoms and you go negative with the antigen test, is that something that assures you, or is it something that you need to confirm further on?
I think for the antigen test, these are usually being recommended by the department, especially for those patients with symptoms. All right.
With symptoms.
So with symptoms,
Yes.
Definitely you can make use of the antigen test, because if it's positive, you're really positive if you have symptoms. Second, if you're a close contact and you've been exposed to a COVID person, you can use actually an antigen test. All right. So, but definitely, if you have you just wanted to test yourself and you're negative, then you have to prove it by the RT-PCR, because it's the sensitivity for that, especially for if you have no symptoms and you just use it for screening purposes, is very low. So you really have to confirm this with an RT-PCR.
Yes, sir. But I asked that po kasi, like I said nga kanina, there are so many antigen tests being sold online, and they're a lot cheaper. They're what, 1/5 of the price being offered by antigen testing being offered by clinics. So, pumapatak na mga 150 to 200 pesos per test eh. So some people might end up choosing to take that kind of test kit. I don't know if that's recommended or if there's any danger there.
You just get the test kits which are approved by FDA, which has a very high 90% specificity and sensitivity. I think that would be more accurate rather than those tests which have not been validated and by RITA.
Okay, basta may FDA. Okay.
Ano kung fake yung FDA yan?
Yun lang.
Yeah, that's kind of hard.
Lahat na fake dito. Walang problema.
You can
nga ng
verify.
kotse, diba?
You can verify with RITM, ma'am, because they validate actually all of the antigen.
Okay.
antigens.
Sige.
But you know, Yusek, for example, in Canada, no, as well as in the US, because I have relatives there. Ang ano na nga raw nagkakaubusan na ng mga tests, no. And ang Canada nga naglabas na ng ng advisory, yung kanilang CDC ron, saying that if you're double vaccinated and you have any of the symptoms, just self-isolate already for 5 days. Parang kumbaga, kahit kung wala na kayong makuhang test, just self-isolate for 5 days. And then after 5 days, if you have to go out, just make sure that you wear a mask. Ganun na raw yung nagiging guideline. I mean, that's the kind of transmissibility that Omicron has. Do you see us getting into that situation now, no? In the very near future, where magkakaubusan na rin ng mga tests, not to mention the fact na napakamahal ng mga tests, and yet ang dami na rin nagpapatest ngayon, Doc.
Right, Ma'am Lucia. In fact, we've been saying this to the local government units and most of the regional centers around, or the offices, to say that if you have this case, active case finding of persons with symptoms, you just have to isolate them. If they have really problems in terms of the RT-PCR, just isolate them for 5 to 7 days and make sure that once they go out, they're symptom-free, provided they're being watched by the BHERTs, the Barangay Health Emergency trained staff, or the local government unit. So if you can identify these persons with symptoms, you just have to isolate them and make sure that they don't go out. If they are still with symptoms after isolation, then you can do a PCR test. But that's the better way really of controlling the transmission.
Pero how can you differentiate na between ordinary cold and fever and coronavirus?
The best way talaga, Ma'am Abby, is we need to have a test because right now it's flu season. It's the temperature is kind of cold across the country, and we've had a lot of people coming in with flu-like symptoms, and it's really hard to tell whether you're dealing with COVID or you're dealing with just an ordinary influenza. So the best way really is just get an antigen test for COVID.
Or just assume that you're
or
assume that you're positive,
assume
and
that
then
you're positive.
self-isolate.
Yeah, and self-isolate and just have some medications and don't get in contact with other people around.
Yeah. Well, Doc, wala. Talagang ilag kami sa test, especially after college. Talagang, we'd like to say thank you to Yusek Leopoldo Vega, our treatment czar. Sir, maraming salamat for joining us tonight. At ingat po.
Maraming salamat po.
Thank you, Yusek.
Thank you po.
Salamat po, Yusek.
Ma'am Lucy, Roby, salamat po. Good evening to you all.
Good evening po.
Thank you.
We will just go into a break, so please stay with us. Welcome back to Chiefs on One News, and now joining us is Strat-based ADR President, Professor Dindo Manhid. Professor Manhid, thank you for joining us, and welcome back to Chiefs.
Happy New Year, Dindo.
Happy New Year,
Happy New Year to everyone. Happy New Year to your viewers.
Happy New Year, sir. Sir, well, a number of us have seen the latest numbers, this time coming from SWS. with Bongbong Marcos 51%, VP Robredo with 14%, and Manny Pacquiao with 12%. So between the first and the second placer so far, at least so far, not even a third of the numbers. Malapit pa nga sa 1/4 eh. Of that number po, how much could you qualify as being what you might call soft support or yung possible pa na, kumbaga, negotiable support? Yung pwede pang bawiin, pwede pang malakad.
In a different survey that was conducted for us by Pulse Asia, we had that opportunity to ask that question. There seems to be that 35% that is still willing to change their vote.
Pretty high.
So, pretty high. But of course, some might change.
Yes,
but
sir.
strong possibility, I think, is within the 15%. So I see that 35% that can will. But of course, always remember the surveys, Ed and everyone, is that they are shaped by what they hear or
Yes,
read on news.
Certainly.
So if it's compelling enough, I think they will change their vote. But that's good enough number that it's still January at this time. Campaign has not started, so there's that possibility that people will be shaped by the narrative that might come from mainstream media, also the reporting that can shape their thinking, which is has not been that way. It's been really social media narrative that bypasses mainstream media.
Yeah,
So
but
what do you-
the part of the narrative that people are hearing and entering 2022 with is just looking at that big number for Bongbong Marcos, that big lead, and so on. Is it how much early, or is it too early for Bongbong Marcos to build on that narrative? Na ito na to, winner na to, sure ball na to. And how big a factor is that for Filipino voters to look at potential winners as early as possible?
At this time, you could say that it's early, but with that kind of number, if they sustain it by February or early March, that would really be a momentum already for the Marcos candidacy. The reason I'm putting that time frame is that by the time there will be actual campaigns already, narratives will be tested by other campaigns. But if they continue and the strength, we've noticed this in our own separate research, whereby the narratives that's being shared in social media, Robbie, was he is the sympathetic leader that we need and the most qualified. So it's tracking. I mean, that means it's getting support from the public, that the downfall of the Philippine economy started after martial law. That kind of narrative. So it's really, it puts pressure on the narrative that is really the other side, which is the camp of VP Lenny, and also the perfect political tandem, the so-called unity team, because it builds on two successful legacies, the Marcos and the Duterte legacy. So those are the three narratives that we saw in social media last December, and it's getting traction. So it's steady at 50%, higher, a little by 50%.
So what are the issues that might be compelling enough to swing those votes? Sabi mo, about 35% still might change their minds about it. You're also tracking those issues, di ba?
The most important issue, same survey period, Ami, was the top three issues is, number one, still the one that is concerned with the poor. If it will be proven by, or the narrative that will be built against Marcos is that he is not that person, or he should not be trustworthy and is corrupt. Those are the three top issues. But right now, that narrative, they're gaining from that. So it's a challenge for the other side to debunk
Well, I guess your
that,
question nga, Dindo, is, how do they debunk? Okay, maybe the question should be, if you were to give advice to, say, the team of Lenny, what should they be doing in order to get closer to, if not overtake, the numbers of BBM?
I think the reality of the situation now is it's not only for VP Lenny, but for other camps, no? Because at the end of the day, they have their own geographical strength. That as you try to debunk the narrative of Mr. Marcos, Pacquiao might gain in his geographic area. Isko might gain in his own geographic area, where he has really fallen in the National Capital Region or in the Mega Manila area. So that kind of view of the election has to be accepted by other candidates, not only by VP Lenny. And from there, whoever gets that plurality come May will be the victor. That's the only way for them to win with the numbers of Mr. Marcos at this time.
Dindo, nabanggit mo si Manny Pacquiao and Isko Moreno. How should their campaigns also be pivoting given the narrative evolving? Because even, for example, for the Lenny camp, parang the dissection and analysis that they're doing relative to all the other candidates is tipong para bang paano natin makukuha na ng boto yung mga yon, and they're not being considered discussed anymore as kalaban ni Bongbong Marcos. Again, these are all just narratives being crafted by other people. But what should the Pacquiao and Isko Moreno camp, and for that matter, the Ping Lacson camp, do so that they are not just also runs in the narrative as we enter 2022?
I think the mistake also of everyone is that there seems to be so much focus on President Duterte. The Robredo camp was focused on what Duterte is doing, and even those naman that would not like to attack Duterte was talking about the Duterte legacy, that they would like to benefit from it. They forget that the focus should be their number one opponent, who's been doing well in 3 surveys already, October, November, December. And they have failed to really focus on challenging the narrative. This campaign is about offering yourself as a better alternative come election day. So they need to build on that, and that's what they have failed. Nobody has really questioned the narrative of Mr. Marcos, and that's a challenge to any campaign right now.
Dindo, you said they have not been able to link Bongbong to the Duterte administration, but his running mate carries the Duterte surname. What if yun yung tack nila na you emphasize na kapartner nito yung anak ng presidente? So why don't they hammer on the continuity, the possibility of more of the same?
That's my point, Ami. I think they've fallen into the trap because if you look really at the narrative of Sara Duterte, she's building on the legacy of the president. No, so why have they not? That's my actual point. They have failed to understand that even though the president has not officially endorsed Marcos, but the Marcos Duterte tandem is the candidate of the president, and it's built on that legacy, And we know that one of the weakness of this administration, though they have been relatively high in terms of performance, is that on the economic issues.
Yes.
Because of this pandemic. But
yes,
nobody has reason.
But Dindo, factoring in the economic issues, all of that, and COVID and the pandemic and so on, the other thing that you mentioned, approval rating is still high, and not to mention, even with everything that you're saying, that she's associated to her father, Sara Duterte just overtook Tito Soto for the vice presidency.
Yes.
What do we take of the net value of the Duterte name at this point, given all of that?
That's why the net value is still good, positive, unless you focus on specific issues. Because on economic issues, Roby, if you will follow Pulse Asia, it's below 50% on economic issues. West Philippine Sea issue, it's over 52%. So that's not high. But nobody's raised that issue. That's why Ami has pointed out that issue right. Have you heard of any of these candidates raising those issues? No one. And I find it weird that they're not attacking your own fellow candidates.
Yes.
There seems to be so much focus, even competing with the disaster response with the government.
Yes, sir,
How can you ever win against the...
On the other hand, Dindo,
hasn't there been enough already said about the Marcoses, about the issues of integrity, trustworthiness, and corruption? These very same issues that voters say they hold very dear and very close to their hearts.
When did you guys discuss this in mainstream media? I'm just following how I've respected media when you dwell on issues and it becomes a daily raising of these issues. It does not reach that level, I believe, on the Marcoses.
On the market.
So, wait, okay, so you're saying that should it be the opponents, or you're waiting for media to be the ones
No, but I mean,
to raise this issue?
no, I'm just reacting to what
Or is it that the opponents of Bongbong are not raising those issues enough?
both,
Is that what you're
both,
saying?
Lucy. I'm just reacting to what Ed was saying, that much has been said. No, not much. The way when you even look at media, and even the opponent themselves, so both. No, so that's why the narrative is working. Because the narrative is dominating the discussion straight to the public themselves, and we have to give credit to that kind of campaign.
Yeah, but in fairness, Dindo, I think that's something for media to reflect on and to digest for our part. But for the part of the candidates, you're also saying you're also perplexed why they haven't taken that tack. Why is that, you think?
I think first, Robbie, there was a wrong assumption that they thought that they're I'll refer to a certain candidate thinks that they are, if on issues like I'm not corrupt, they've always believed that they were not corrupt compared to Marcos, but the voters are saying no. So that's why it's very important to look at baseline data. Your assumption as a campaign might be different from the perspective of voters. When you speak as pro-poor, some might say, I'm more pro-poor, I've done this and that. But what if the voters doesn't see it that way? And that's where I feel the mistake of other candidates are this past 2 months since they filed their candidacy last October.
What if Imelda Marcos is brought into the picture? Just to
That's why
remind everyone of what it was like before.
That's why if you notice, Imelda Marcos is not in the picture.
Yes.
It's a strategy also. And also, nobody's discussing the cases
Yes.
that previous government has won against the Marcoses.
Well, sir, it's also hard to discuss those cases when the person you want to discuss them with does not want to be interviewed. I mean,
No, it's not about him being interviewed, because maybe it's something also that we also need to ask ourselves. Why does he like to be interviewed? Maybe he's avoiding to address these issues. But can he really avoid being interviewed or being covered when it's election campaign season already?
well, actually, sir, that's a pretty good question, sir. Let me ask you that. We've said time and again things may change when the campaign period starts. But at the same time, sir, let me ask you this then. What would be different with the campaign period, aside from the debate? Because the debate is an optional thing. I mean, nobody can force a candidate to go to the debate. So it's still an optional
when
thing.
When it's actual election, isn't it you cover them? I mean, you assign somebody in there to you assign teams to cover each major candidates. They whoever that person is, whoever that candidate will be forced to address or answer issues.
On the other hand, when we interviewed sila Tony Lavinia, sila Professor Tayaw, I recall that they were saying that one of the, ang tingin, hindi naman mistakes, pero ang observation nila ay, the more you hit out at Duterte, for example, lalong nagagalit sa kanila yung voters ni Bongbong. Because the voters, the supporters of Duterte.
I hear the same thing about attacks on Bongbong Marcos, gaining sympathy votes.
Oo. So parang, in fact, ang point nga nila is, that's the reason why nag-change na rin ng tack. Halimbawa, si Isko is now trying to get the endorsement of Duterte in hopes that he'll be able to get some of the, those straddling between Bongbong and Duterte right now, makuha niya yun.
If we follow that argument, election is over. It's as simple as that. So let's get ready and maybe ask Bongbong Marcos who are the people that will be part of his cabinet and what this platform of government is. No? Because nothing seems to work. Right? But has anyone really challenged these narratives? As in, when you say challenged, I'm not talking about media per se, but the campaign itself. Because the narratives being shared by, in the case of the Marcoses, we've tracked it in our institute, 8 million followers sharing it daily.
Kahit
Or-
Dr. Willie Ong merong 8 million followers, di naman nanalo. But anyway,
But that's Doc Willie Ong. Marcoses are different.
May kasamang medical ano yun, medical
Oh,
advice.
medical eh. Diba? That's why iba yung effect kay Doc Willie Ong. Followers have a different objective when they follow him. In this case, the followers are built on the idea of pushing this narrative.
but
And
Dindo,
it's
Dindo, you think halimbawa if you go after yung tinatanong ko kanina, you go after other persons around the Bongbong Sara campaign, you know, Bong Revilla, GMA, yung mga taong yan, will that work?
you create that perception that there are cases surrounding them, it might work. Yeah. But you need to keep on harping it. I think what's happening that's why the analysis is coming out that way from Professor Lavinia, Professor Tayo, is that what we see, it's not working, but how we see really people dwelling on these issues head on, substantively, consistently for weeks and weeks. No eh. Parang they get frustrated and they move on. And that's not how campaign narratives happen.
Do you really think the rift in the administration, I think there's a real rift, no? Do you think the rift in the administration is really over? Kasi nag-file nga yung PDP laban faction ni Energy Secretary Kungsky ng extension daw for the certificate of candidacy, meaning they intend daw to recommend to nominate another candidate. So may gusto yung faction nila presidente na ibang kandidato. You think that rift is really over?
The rift between members of the cabinet and Bongbong and Sara might be true, but the rift between President Duterte,
And the daughter.
Marcos, and Sara Duterte might not be that deep. So, because that's our point. President Duterte is not a candidate. His cabinet has no role in this election because they don't have a major candidate. But the mere fact we're talking about them, it deflects and diverts the issue. That the focus should be on Marcos by the other camps. Even the attempt by some candidates to get the endorsement of the president, that's why in the last survey, Isko Moreno is down to 6%. He really lost a lot there. I think when he started, because that was a time period that he was saying that he could be that option. And he rose in the middle part of this year as a very critical but independent, not opposition, independent alternative to the president. So he has lost momentum on that issue.
Dindo, we've been picking your brain on the presidential race and, for that matter, for the presidential candidates. Let's shift a bit to the vice presidential race. How should Tito Soto be taking the last surveys? Na overnight, biglang
wake up call, really. And I think this is now the big challenge to candidates like Senate President Soto. His strength has always been television, and television is actually king, as we call it, still the dominant source of news that shapes voters' mind. Problem is, Senator Soto has been campaigning with a tandem, and the tandem seems to be not working. Unlike Vice Presidential candidate Duterte, she's running with a stronger presidential candidate. She's being pulled up. Or both of them are pulling each other up. I'm talking about Bongbong and Sara Duterte. With Senator Soto, it's time to think really that would it be good to stand up on his own as a vice presidential candidate, because his tandem, Senator Lacson, is not really doing very well.
But it's one thing. You make it sound as if Ping Lacson is a burden and pulling him down. rather than merely not adding and not
Not adding is what I'm saying, not adding.
Yeah.
Not
Oh,
adding.
then what's the benefit of standing on his own?
The benefit of standing on his own is he can build alliances with other candidates also, build on their strength. Hard to discuss this thing in open TV, but there will be permutations of
Okay.
strategy.
But
Yeah,
these are
I was
things
going to
imagine
ask you nga
that
eh,
goes into
do you
alliance
see
building.
do you see a realignment kumbaga, of competing forces as we head toward the elections, especially if
There should be. I believe two scenarios, Luchino. One is Bongbong Marcos maintains successfully the narrative and will be our president. But the other narrative or alternative to if this narrative is suddenly attacked and it successfully weakens his campaign, like what Ami is saying about hitting on other persons or hitting on the history, but that will not necessarily gain to one candidate or another. It can gain in different ways, but it takes a realignment of forces also.
Yeah.
It takes a realignment of forces.
Dindo, I won't ask you about the Supreme Court, but it's somehow we want to disaggregate it from that. But do you genuinely, at this point, sincerely believe that Bongbong Marcos is President Duterte's candidate?
Oh yes, when Bongo stepped down as candidate, that cleared the way. So I believe the Supreme Court case, the Formula case, we've seen. I still respect the institutions, but at times the institutions needs to be influenced by public opinion, and that right now the issues against Bongbong Marcos is not on the top of mind of voters. I talk about the disqualification, the issues raised in his disqualification. It's not really being felt.
You think the COVID situation will be an issue in the elections, or the way it's being handled or mishandled? Considering what's happening now, start of the year, we're in lockdown again.
It could be if the other side will define Bongbong Marcos as a continuation of the Duterte administration.
Okay, Strat-based ADR President Professor Dindo Manhit. Sir, maraming salamat for joining us tonight. Always a pleasure to have you on board. Ingat po.
Thank you,
Thank you, Dindo.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to everyone.
Happy New Year,
Thank you.
That'll be all for this edition of the Chiefs. We hope what was discussed here will keep the conversation going. Before we go, a reminder to our viewers, mask on, wash hands, and stay safe, Philippines. I'm Edlin Gao.
I'm Ami Paminton of the Philippine Star.
I'm Luchi Cruz Valdez of News 5.
I'm Robbie Alampay, and we are One News.